Thanks, Mads. Today we are joined by Audrey Assad to talk about the music and the message of Celine Dion.
Welcome to Pop Culture Catechism, conversations about music, movies, and the longings of the human heart. Let's get started.
Where do silent hearts go? Where does my heart beat now? Where is the sound that only echoes through the night? Where does my heart beat now? You might recognize these questions from the lyrics of one of the world's best singers and one of the best singers, I think, in history, Celine Dion. We're talking about her today because she's had a huge impact on the music of the last few decades, but also because she is one of my wife's favorite artists, and she's been telling me for a long time, you got to talk about Celine Dion, and she's also one of the favorite artists of our guest today, Audrey Assad. I invited Audrey here today to have a conversation and to hear a bit of her story and to listen to her. I don't want to tell you too much of her story because I would rather you hear it from her. A story that I'll share. A few weeks ago, I was talking with my friend Laura. We were at homecoming at our alma mater, the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And we were reminiscing about old times and catching up on who we've seen and who we've talked to. Oh, so have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? And at one point, she asked me, does it ever make you sad that so many of our friends are no longer practicing their Catholic faith? And, you know, we went on retreats with all these people. We sang songs with all these people. We went to praise and worship adoration. We prayed rosaries together. We did service work together. We went on mission trips together. Some of them were in our weddings as groomsmen and bridesmaids. Some of them are godparents to our children. And it seems that slowly through the years, many of them no longer call the Catholic faith their own. And I said, yeah, that does make me think sometimes. And I do wonder about that. Now, normally on this show, what I try to do is I try to find the awesomest, most engaging Catholics and Christians I can find who are alive in their faith and communicate it well. And a few years ago, many Catholic podcasts would have said near the top of that list, the person you got to talk to. One of those people is Audrey Assad. She's, in my opinion, arguably the best female voice in Christian music. Just you listen to her sing, it's amazing. But a few years ago, Audrey kind of bravely, I think, announced to the world a little bit about her spiritual journey that she no longer really calls the Catholic faith her own. We're going to hear her story today. So I invited her here to talk a little bit about why, because I think for many of us, the Catholic faith can be a struggle. It's countercultural. It goes against so much of what our world sees as good and beautiful. It's a very kind of sign of contradiction for many of the things. And I've felt that too. And I've had my own struggles and ups and downs with faith. And knowing Audrey, a little bit of Audrey's story, reading her blogs, hearing some of her talks, listening to her music, I almost feel like I know her a little bit, even though I've only met her for the first time just a few minutes ago. So I kind of took a risk and said, would you be willing to come on the show and share with us about your journey? Because I think it's something that I can learn from, and maybe we can learn some too. So we're not here to have a debate. We're just here to learn from other people. So I want to thank Audrey for her generosity and vulnerability to come on here and share with us, you know, even random strangers on the internet, a little bit of her story. And in Pop Culture Catechism fashion, we're going to do all this through the lens and the music of Celine Dion. If you don't know who I am, my name is Mike Tenney. I'm a Catholic speaker and worship leader from Washington, D.C. I spent over a decade teaching Catholic high school theology, and now I'm blessed to speak to thousands of people each year through different events all over the place and leading worship all over the place. And through this show, Pop Culture Catechism, this is Pop Culture Catechism, the gospel according to pop music and movies, where we take a look in the music and the movies that you're plugged into, and we try to find God's love in those things so that when we unplug and go out in the real world, we can have a better awareness of God's love in our hearts and live in that love and share it with the people around us. And so that's our goal by the end of today. Hopefully you'll learn a little something. You'll be asking some more of the right questions. You'll have a greater appreciation for Celine Dion, and hopefully we'll be filled with a little more peace and love in our heart to share with the world. I want to give a special thank you to our patrons who support this show through popculturecatechism.com, and our sponsor for the episode, CatholicMerch.store, and all the swag you buy through that store supports the shows here on Awaken Catholic. I want to welcome to our show, Audrey Assad. Audrey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. I'd say I'm about 78% on the health scale.
Oh,
and,
well, thank you for being here. I appreciate your perseverance.
No, glad to be here. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So I'm sure some people who are listening to the show know who you are. Some people probably don't. What are you up to these days? What are you doing?
Well, I'm very busy parenting. I have two children, 9 and 6. Mm-hmm. And then So that's, first and foremost what I'm up to. But then I am also releasing a bunch of new music and started doing that in June. So I have 2 singles out towards this album that I crowdfunded. And I am finishing all the songs for that and just getting them out into the world.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm super excited
Me
to
too.
hear the new stuff. You put out a couple songs under a different name, a couple, like maybe a year ago.
Are you thinking of the Overstory by chance?
Yes, the Overstory.
Yeah, that was a few.
Yeah.
I was actually in 2020, believe it or not, or
Man.
2021, maybe when we released it. I can't remember.
Yeah.
The pandemic makes everything a blur.
Yeah, it does.
We recorded it right before everything locked down.
Oh man.
In February of 2020. But yeah, 2 friends of mine and I formed a little band and recorded 5 or 6 songs, I think, that we'd worked on, and they're kind of, just songs about life and love and growing up.
I liked them. Some of them were just
you.
like very, very cut to the heart. So I really appreciate those songs.
I loved them, and yeah, we hope to do something else someday. We'll see.
That's awesome. Very cool. So we'll get more into this as we go through and talk about Celine Dion and so forth. We'll get more into your story, but kind of tell us, for those who don't know us, can you give us kind of the broad strokes of your spiritual journey through the years?
Yeah.
I know that's a tall order.
That's okay. I've it's something people ask me on a regular basis, so I feel like I've got it, memorized at this point. But I was raised in New Jersey by my Syrian refugee dad and my American mom. And we were part of a church called the Plymouth Brethren, which is sort of a Quaker adjacent type of, I say that not because all the spiritual beliefs were the same, but a lot of the ascetic practices. So women covering their heads, dressing quite differently than the world, let's say, and yeah, so I was raised in a very non-hierarchical Protestant tradition, very simplistic and very focused on the end times, actually. So grew up steeped in the book of Revelation and waiting for the second coming kind of thing. It was an interesting way to grow up. And then I also became a Catholic eventually, but so I left the Plymouth Brethren when I was 19. I became a Catholic at the age of 24. And in that 5-year period, I kind of church hopped backwards. It was like Baptist, Presbyterian, maybe I'm going to be Episcopal. Nope, too liberal at the time. And then I ended up in the Catholic Church at the age of 24 as an adult convert. And which, gosh, it was an amazing experience. And I just don't really see another way it could have gone. It was sort of like my curiosity couldn't let me just settle for a small slice of Christian tradition when I knew that there was this old and kind of massive, rich bank, I guess, storehouse of older thought and older practice. I really felt like if I'm going to be a Christian, I want to be a Christian who's doing the Christianity that's grown from the beginning, not something that started in the 1800s as a response to clericalism. That was the way my mind works. And I just ended up a Catholic. And then, so hard to fit the next part into a short amount, but I guess I'll just say in 2016, I started trauma therapy because I was diagnosed with CPTSD, which is like PTSD, except not from one major event, but from a slow drip of smaller events in my childhood. And when I started trauma therapy, it was almost like I had this awakening to the fact that my faith, my original faith, the faith in the idea of Jesus Christ as God, of there being one God who is benevolent and all-knowing and who knows me in his personal, all of that foundation to my systems of belief and my practices as a religious person was something I had never even taken a moment to really question. And once I did start doing that, for various reasons, it fell apart like a house of cards for me. And that's a long story. I know I'm kind of shorthanding, but in broad strokes, that's what happened. I got divorced. After that point, I ended up stopping practicing Catholicism. and Christianity in general. And so now I'm here as a sort of nun, I guess, as they term them, None. And it's funny because I used to sort of I had an inner scoffing at those people for so long. And like the universe and God paid me back by bringing me into that same camp, so that I have a lot more understanding of why people end up here, because I've ended up here. And I actually think that's a beautiful experience to have. I sort of have room for everything in myself. I have so much room for people to believe differently than me, because I know that I guess I don't believe anything is as simplistic as some of us would like to make it, including angry atheists. So that's not where I landed.
Yeah, well, and it's I think the word that I think in the Catholic tradition we would ascribe to what you're describing is humility. There's
I hope so.
It's a certain amount of, I don't see myself as superior. I have some compassion for where people have gone. And I think you say, maybe I would have kind of scoffed at people in those situations. And I've found that in myself. And as somebody who has kind of devoted himself to a life of evangelism, I make content for the internet. I talk at youth groups. I spent a long time in Catholic schools. I'm trying to like let people know about the love of Jesus. There can be a real temptation to be like, all right, there's like the solid, like real Catholics. And then there's like the lapsed Catholics. And then there's like the Catholics who maybe go to church, but then they like still use birth
cafeteria
control,
Catholics.
Cafeteria Catholics. There's like the practicing Catholics. Like we kind of have these labels or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm often challenged when I read the stories of the gospel, how often Jesus is like pointing his finger at the super religious people and being like, look, you don't got it. This guy beating his breast and saying like, have mercy on me, a sinner. Like that's who's got it. It's not the older brother who says, yes, Father, I'll go work in the fields, and then never does it. It's the brother who says, no, I'm not going to go work in the fields, but then actually goes out and does it. And so I think that's an important message for those of us who claim that we have the capital T truth, to have some humility there, that like, I'm not better than anybody else.
Yeah. And like Jesus really modeled not obsessing over whether someone has done all the right things. And I think that's challenging. And if it's not challenging, it's not really Jesus teaching, in my opinion,
Yeah.
He really issued a lot of challenges to a lot of kinds of people, not just Pharisees and not just religious people, So that seems characteristic of his influence,
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to get into a little bit of Celine Dion, but before I do, I just want to give a disclaimer from my listeners and the audience. Sometimes on this show, we have discussions that are sensitive. We've talked about like racism and feminism and war and sex, you name it. And I want to reiterate, Audrey and I aren't here to debate, but to try to learn from the experience of others. And in this case, we're trying to learn from someone who has had a different experience of the church than maybe some of us have had. And I know we won't agree on everything. There might be some things that she says or that I say that you might not agree with, and probably lots of things that we don't say that you think, oh, you should have said this. Why didn't you say this? And I would just invite you, as you listen, to try to have the spirit of Ted Lasso and be curious, to try to have some humility and try to, wherever you are on your spiritual walk or spiritual journey, be open to another person's perspective and listening. And so often in the gospel, when Jesus meets people, the first thing he does is he listens to them. And the next thing he does is he asks them some questions, right? And then he speaks. And so that's what I think we're going to try to do here, is just try to have a conversation, two people sharing about their experience of faith and their love of Celine Dion. So that's what we're going to do today. If you don't know who Celine Dion is, listeners, she's a French-Canadian singer. She won the Eurovision Song Contest in 1988 at the age of 20, which I didn't know until I was researching for this episode, but she sold 200 million records worldwide. She's one of the best-selling music artists of all time as well. She is the best-selling Canadian recording artist and the best-selling French language artist in history. Best Canadian recording artist. I guess she just edged out Matt Maher there, just a little bit. She has five Grammys, and she's awesome. So, Audrey, tell me what you love about Celine.
Okay, so I'll just paint you a picture. But when I was young, I was, as I said, raised in the Plymouth Brethren, and now most kids in the Plymouth Brethren were not permitted to listen to any secular music. And we were a sort of exception. And when I say that, I mean my parents had this weird little short list of artists that we were allowed to listen to. And it was like Simon and Garfunkel, John Denver, Fleetwood Mac's greatest hits for some reason, and then Celine Dion and Jewel. And that was like the list. You know, we
Did you
could
say
listen
Jewel?
Jewel. Yeah. My dad really, really loved Jewel for some reason. And so we would listen to
That's
her
awesome.
sometimes.
That's quite the lineup.
Yeah, it was an interesting group. I mean, it was a lot of my mom's favorite stuff, you know, that was sort of like contraband, but not really. You know, it was so, I grew up listening to Celine because I couldn't listen to very much other than that. And she just, I know she's corny, but like her voice really thrilled me. I remember being really young, like probably 7 or 8, and I was sitting in the car and we had her playing on, you know, the minivan speakers, and I don't remember what song it was, but I was hearing all these harmonics in her voice. Like, for listeners who aren't familiar with what that is, it's sort of like these overtones over a note. So you'll hear a C, and then her voice was so powerful that I could hear other notes inside this note, and I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what a harmonic was, you know, but I'm like, Mom, oh my gosh, she's singing like 4 notes at the same time. I can hear all these different notes. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know. It would give me such a physical thrill and such an emotional thrill to hear her belt her notes. And I would go up into my room and shut the door and get the hairbrush. I mean, fully, you know, Lion King giant t-shirt and just lip sync in the mirror to her songs. And one of them in particular, when I started going through puberty and like having crushes on people, I would be so distraught over whatever crush I was having at the time not liking me back or whatever. And there was this one song that she had called If You Could See Me Now, which, if you haven't heard it, go check it out and just imagine a 12-year-old crying and lip syncing to this song over some boy that was like not even, I mean, I was just so overwrought about it. And Celine gave me the perfect vehicle to kind of feel my feels, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just grew up with her. I loved her voice so much that I almost didn't care what she was singing, because some of her songs, I'll be honest, I'm like, these are cheesy songs. Like there was one album she had where, and I'm forgetting the name, but it's the darker cover where she has big, really smoky eyes, and it's kind of like in the 90s. Anyway, she has a song on there with this Jamaican artist, and it's like Celine puts on a Jamaican accent to sing the song.
Is this the Treat Her Like a Lady?
Yes.
Yeah, my wife was playing this in the beginning of the song the other day. I was like,
it makes
God.
me cringe to the bottom of my body. I'm just like, oh God. But so she seems to be a little oblivious of what might be, you know, considered like, I don't know.
Culturally sensitive.
Yeah. But she's very kind-hearted. I've noticed. I've watched a lot of interviews with her over the years, and just seems like a really sweet human and who really cares about her fans. And I've always just really loved her. I feel like she's my aunt, you know, and she helped me think about my heart a lot as a younger person. So I have a lot of love for Celine.
I heard someone say once that what makes a good singer different from a talented singer is that when a good singer sings, you believe them. Mm-hmm. And you know, like Bob Dylan had a terrible singing voice, but when he sang, you believed him that it was like real. And I think that's sometimes why people kind of scoff at, here's another Canadian artist like Nickelback or like Creed, you know, because it's like, you know, they're doing kind of the Kurt Cobain thing, but like, you don't always really believe them that they're doing the Kurt Cobain thing. Whereas like Celine, even though the lyrics are cheesy, like I believe her when she sings about the throes and depths of passion. Like I believe her.
Yeah, it seems like she's in touch with, to me, it seems like she's in touch with something that's beyond her personal specific circumstances when she's singing those songs. Like she's channeling some kind of a more universal spirit around a topic, and people can relate to that feeling. And so even if it's not her real story, like she sings about love in ways that I know don't apply to her real life.
Yeah.
Because I know about her relationship with her husband. Obviously I don't know the details, but like, I know how in love they were until the end and how loyal she was to him. And so all these breakup songs are not coming from her personal experience, because she married him when she was like, 18 years old or something, 19. Really young, And so that was her only relationship. So it's like, I know you didn't really break up with, you know, whoever, but I believe you because you're feeling into something that we all feel at some time in our life. And she does seem to have that ability, I feel, you know?
Yeah. for sure. Her, I kind of love that she's a diva. You know, she plays the part really well. My wife is telling me apparently she's in a movie right now. I forget what it's called, but it's on Netflix. It's a rom-com, and Celine Dion has like a kind of a secondary role in it where she plays herself. And my wife's like, she's really good. Like she really plays up the part really well. And
I bet.
She just
I haven't seen that, man.
The quintessential diva.
I know what my homework is. Yeah, I love her. There's a really good documentary about her. I think you can just find it on YouTube, actually. When she was traveling with her newborn twins on tour, and just you get to see what she's really like to people and her fans that love her so much and how much attention she gives to them. And I respect her a lot. I think she does play it up. But I think maybe she's in on the joke. That's what I wonder, you know, like, is she in on it? She
did the Deadpool song.
Yeah.
That video where Deadpool's like dancing around like ballet or whatever. So I think she is kind of in on the joke.
Yeah,
have you ever seen her live?
Tragically, I have not. And I guess I never will, because she's very ill, and I don't think she's got like recover.
That muscle tightness.
Yeah.
I had gotten my wife tickets as like her finishing grad school present. We were going to go see her when she came to DC a few years ago, and the date was like March 12th, 2020. And so it got pushed back because of the pandemic, and then it got pushed back again, and then it got totally canceled. So I was like,
I'm sorry. That's a bummer. I mean, my heart goes out to her and her family, because I think what she's ill with is very, very tragic and difficult. I read a recent statement, like it came out very recently, from someone in her camp that said that she can barely move. She's, barely speak, barely move. And it's kind of like ALS, from what I understand, where your body just, kind of takes over and you don't really have a choice in how well you're doing. And that's really tough. Tough way to suffer.
All right. Well, can we jump into some songs here? Very good. So the first song I want to talk about, this is one of her kind of later songs. This is year like 2000. It's called That's the Way It Is.
It's an uphill climb and I'm feeling sorry, but I know it will come to you, yeah. So don't surrender, 'cause you can win in this thing called love. When you want it the most, there's no easy way out. When you're ready to go and your heart's left in doubt, don't give up on your faith. Love comes to those who believe it, and that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's the way it is.
And do you happen to know who wrote this off the top of your head?
Is it Diane Warren?
No, it's Max Martin.
It is?
Max Martin.
I did
wrote
not
this.
know that.
Yeah, and if you listen to it with that in mind, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is a Max Martin song. It sounds like Backstreet Boys. It sounds like Insane.
Yes, it does.
It sounds like
the chords and everything. Yeah,
yep,
totally.
Oh
Yeah, wow. So that tracks. Okay.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask, we could have done a Max Martin episode, because I probably already have, but I love Max Martin.
Yeah, he's great. Listeners, if you don't know who Max Martin is, he's written like #1 hits for every artist under the sun. He's like Swedish songwriting god. So yeah. All right. So this song, I can read your mind. I know your story. I see what you're going through. It's an uphill climb. I'm feeling sorry. I know it will come to you. Don't surrender, because you can win in this thing called love. So this song is basically like older Celine talking to a younger person who's down in the dumps, doesn't have love in their life. The bridge says, when life is empty with no tomorrow and loneliness starts to call, baby, don't worry, forget your sorrow, because love's going to conquer it all. So, do you relate to this song at all? Like, when we talk about like love's going to conquer it all, I mean, that's kind of cliche.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's true?
I don't know. I really hope so. I was just talking to someone about this. I know we weren't trying to get into a conversation about Palestine and Israel right now, but we don't have to get deep into it. But I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, about how I feel a little jaded about what's going to happen at the end of all this. I'm like, I grew up believing that there would be a love that would set it all right at some point, or like even as a Catholic with a more mature, I would say, evolved belief in, like a more nuanced belief system than I grew up with. I loved Dostoevsky, and Dostoevsky would sort of talk about how like all these tears and all this pain, that someday we're going to understand why it happened and we're going to have some kind of resolution. Love will conquer it all, essentially. I don't know if I believe that. I want to believe that. But I can't say with any honesty that I actually do believe it. I definitely hold on to hope in that. I will say that. But I don't know that I believe that that's true.
Yeah. And
I
think, yeah. And I think for me, I'm not that different from you, especially when I look at situations the world is like, I don't know how this is going to resolve, and I even look at things in our country and politically, or even when I've looked at some situations in my own life with my family or my wife or a friend or something. And there are these times when it seems like, well, if this happens and this happens, and you can kind of understand what's happening, but you don't see a way through. I think that's a pretty common experience of life. And especially with the Israel-Palestine conflict, there can be a kind of resignation, I think, to say, I just kind of want to throw my hands up. And that can either look like despair,
right?
But I think it can also look like kind of like a hollow sort of faith. I think there can be a temptation from a faith perspective to be like, oh, well, in the book of Revelation, it says God's going to wipe every tear from every eye and then we're going to be good. Right. And so, God's going to take care of it all. I can just sit here safe in America and I don't need to worry about all those people like dying and, terrorism and civilian casualties and all those sorts of things. And I think there can be a real dismissiveness from a faith perspective that is rejecting the hopelessness, but is not necessarily better than hopelessness. In fact, it might actually be worse. Like in the letter of St. James, he says, what good is your faith if a brother comes to you and says, hey, I'm hungry. And you're like, dude, I will pray for you, go and be
good
well.
Luck. God bless,
God bless you. And so I think the challenge for me is, it's one, to not lose hope, but to two, not just be like, all right, God, you got it. Cause yes, God gets it. And there's this line in the song, don't surrender because you can win. What is surrender? There's a sort of surrender that's like hopelessness. Like I'm giving up, I'm compromising my morals. I'm compromising who I am, but there's a different kind of surrender too, that I think can be really helpful that doesn't look like giving up. I don't know if you ever listened to Vince Sherman and Army of Me. Are you familiar with that
I
artist?
know Vince.
You know Vince?
Yeah,
he's a good
he's
dude.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We my wife and I danced to one of his songs at our wedding, but he has a song where he says, although I've surrendered, I'm not giving up. And I think that's kind of the perspective I have where, yes, I trust in God's providence. Yes, I trust in the power of love to get us through, that love's going to conquer it all. But that doesn't mean I just get to sit back and do nothing, right? It doesn't mean I get to give up in despair. It doesn't mean I get to give up in like kind of letting God do all the work, like I think part of faith is being faithful. And that means like putting in the work every day as best you can, like,
not that's a very Catholic belief, I feel, being the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. Yeah. And I want to say too, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Taoism at all. Yeah. But that's a very Taoistic type of principle. And that principle of kind of the doing and the non-doing, or the doubt and the faith, like all of those things living together, is across several religions, over the centuries there, because I think that's probably wisdom, Yeah.
It's something in the human heart. C.S. Lewis talks a lot about the Tao in his books. And I remember studying Taoism in college and being like, you sure this isn't like some Christianity or whatever? But I think it's just because God, there's a certain truth that you can find, and I believe the Catholic faith. There's a reason I'm Catholic and not Taoist, but there's definitely something there that I think is really true and good and beautiful. And
I think a lot of people have experienced that is the wisest way,
for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Have you ever read Anthony de Mello? He's a Jesuit. So he talks about like kind of the confluence of Christianity, Catholicism, and
Yes.
like more quote unquote Eastern ways of thinking. So.
Yeah, and Merton was really, I know, educated in those streams of thought
Thomas
as well,
Merton,
who is still to this date my favorite Catholic author. Someone I still return to. I'm going to visit the Abbey hopefully soon for the first time where he lived, in Kentucky. It's called the Abbey of Gethsemane, and it's about 2 hours from where I live. And you can go there for just solo retreating, or you can have a guided retreat. There's different, things you can do. But yeah, Merton really opened my ears and eyes, I think, to that as well. The sort of quote unquote Eastern concepts that he saw as harmonious with Catholicism, or at least complementary, but yeah, just what you were saying reminded me of that there's a way to be hopeful without being hollow about it. And without giving up on, despair. Yeah, it's interesting. Surrender and despair don't have to be synonymous, right? Yeah.
One of my favorite prayers that I discovered when I was first kind of transitioning in high school from I say the Our Father and the Hail Mary and like grace before meals to like actually having somewhat of an interior life where I actually like went a little deeper. My brother went to a Jesuit college and he gave me a book of prayers, like a prayer book. And one of the prayers in there was a Thomas Merton prayer. And it was like my Lord, I have no idea where I'm going. I don't see the road ahead of me. And that prayer was like the beginning of my interior life, like just praying those words and I think it matches up very well with this idea of surrender. Cause he says, I don't know if anything I'm doing is any good, but I believe I'm trying, and I'm trying to try. And I believe that pleases you. So I'm going to trust in you, but also I'm not going to stop working. I'm just going to, even though things seem hopeless, I'm going to try to keep doing what I think I'm supposed to do. Or as they say in Frozen 2, do the next right thing.
Next right thing. Yeah.
So,
that's good.
So listeners, just so you know, I told Audrey I would probably ask some personal questions and she's free to ignore any of them and we can snip that out so she won't even know that I ask any of them. So just know that I'm not pinning her with any of these personal questions.
Yeah, this is all consensual.
Yeah. So there's a line here. Don't give up on your faith. Love comes to those who believe it. How do you see yourself now? Do you feel like you gave up on your faith? Do you feel like it's like, when you hear that line, like, does that resonate with you? Does you say, no, that was not my experience. That's not what I did. Like, what would you say is your faith life now?
So I was raised to believe that faith meant basically complete trust in the unseen realities that I believed, that I was taught to believe about God. Even, regardless of feelings or circumstances, put your hope and your trust in this truth. I don't know if that's the best definition of faith or not, but that's the definition that I was sort of brought up with. And so at this point, I would say, no, I don't think I have faith in that way. Like, I don't have an utter trust in anything specific. So that's one thing. However, I feel like that's a little bit like reductive about my inner life, because I have a very rich spiritual inner life still. And I do experience that there is something beyond me. I've never really, there was a moment, like maybe 6 months to a year, where I really did sort of dabble with nihilism. And that was in about 2019. I had really just lost any sense of meaning and purpose. And that was, I think, a necessary de-evolution for me, of just letting it all fall away and seeing what remained in the ruins of even meaning itself. Because I really lost touch with that. I really did. And it was depressing. I did not like it. I was like,
yeah, what a way to go into the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. And it was January 2019 when that shifted, actually. So I guess it was more like 2018 when Evergreen was coming out. And
Great album, by the way.
Thank you. I love that album. It was so sincere and such an attempt to hold on. There's a song on it that is like, it's one of my least popular songs, but
Isn't
that's fine. Called Unfolding. That, for anyone who's curious about where I was really at that time, that song says everything. And the way it came about was that I had this moment one day where I was like, when I say Jesus Christ, I don't know if I'm praying or cursing anymore. I don't know. I don't know what I've just lost it's hard to describe, because for someone who hasn't been through this total like inner shift of having believed something for so long, and then suddenly sort of over a few years not really being able to access that feeling of certainty, or that feeling of not just certainty, because certainty is not a must for faith, right? I don't believe those two things have to exist together. I never did. Well, at least not as in my adult life. But I genuinely did read so much from a Catholic perspective, and then outside of that, and come to a conclusion that I'm like, I don't think I believe these things. I think that I believed them because I was building on my original beliefs of what I was sort of taught as a child. But if I really take a step back and look at all this, I don't believe this. And there are a lot of reasons why that might be true, but all this to say, it wasn't, I tried extremely hard to hold on. It was a decade-long effort, a nearly decade-long effort, starting in 2013 when I first began to question the idea of hell. And then I'm reading the catechism, I'm reading apologetics. I was very steeped in like traditional and modern Catholic thought. So it wasn't for lack of an attempt to hold on to it, but I couldn't be inauthentic and say, I still believe these things when I didn't. I don't think I gave up on it. I think that I came to acceptance of where I was really at. And, faith for me now is pretty simple. I seem to experience that there's something bigger than me that binds us all together, and that I think is loving. And I hope in that, when I go to bed and I'm depressed and anxious about the state of the world, that is what I try to remind myself of. So I guess you could say that is my faith. It's not very specific.
Yeah. I first of all, thank you for sharing all that, and talking about humility. And before, I always try to remember when I'm hearing the experience of someone who has walked a different path than me, or responded differently to situations than I have. I always try to remember that not everyone has had the experiences that I've had. Not everybody has had the experience of church that I have. Like, some people have been really hurt by people in the church. I've had, for the most part, like awesome priests. I had an awesome youth group growing up. I had, healthy. People teach me like a healthy view of sexuality and those sorts of things that wasn't like based in shame and purity culture. And I had like awesome experiences of like worship and fellowship. And I always try to remember that I'm not better than other people, because a lot of people haven't had those experiences, and a lot of people, the priest at their parish was a total jerk bag or abusive, or, they didn't have a welcoming situation. And I really love that you say, like, you didn't give up, like you dug in, you're reading the catechism, you're praying. And I think a lot of times Christians, we can kind of write off this process of what is popularly called now deconstruction, of kind of going back and reevaluating what you've been taught as a child. And I think the process of deconstruction is important for everyone. And I think it actually can form the bedrock of a really strong faith. And I think you're right that certainty, like mental certainty, doesn't equate to faith. That's not my understanding. I don't think it's Catholicism's understanding. In fact, in the catechism, and I wish I had the paragraph numbers in front of me, but it actually talks about the difference between like certainty and faith. Because what real faith looks like is not, I'm always 100% certain of these things. But even in those times when I'm uncertain, I still choose to trust. I still choose to go forward, take the next right step, as again, they say in Frozen. And for me, in those times of doubt that I've had, in those times of despair, of surrender, giving up, whatever, I've tried to make the choice that I believe is, even if I'm not sure I believe in the power of love to conquer it all, I try to almost act like it is. Like, well, what I want to believe is not kind of the nihilistic world of nothing, and nothing means anything, and there's no meaning and no purpose and no right and wrong or anything like that. I don't want to live in that type of world. So I'm not going to go, I'm going to choose not to go down that road. I'm going to choose to kind of fake it until I make it, in a way, you know? And I don't think that makes your faith fake any more than a relationship with a loved one, where you don't always necessarily have all the feels. Like I am faithful to my wife, not because I always have certainty of her feelings towards me, not because I always know what's going on, but because I've made a commitment. And so being faithful doesn't always look like mental certainty. And I think the same is true of our relationship with God. And I think the process that you went through, from a certain point of view, could be described as like very faithful, like doing your due diligence to like seek the truth, you know, because as Catholics, we believe God is capital T truth. So if you're seeking truth, like you're seeking God.
And I still feel that way. It's interesting. Like when in January of 2019, I did my first therapeutic psychedelic experience. And that was because I was still having symptoms of PTSD, even though I had done all this talk therapy and done all this 4 years of work, you know, and longer. And I had been researching the promising, you know, effects of particularly psilocybin and mushrooms for PTSD victims. And I did that, and it was what brought me back from nihilism, actually, because while I was in that state, in that experience, I experienced the love of God at a very cellular level. Mm-hmm. For the first time ever in some ways. But I came out with less beliefs that were very specific in any specific God. However, at the time that I did that, I was like, I don't even believe love is real. I don't think I even love my kids. It's just biology. I was depressed because that sucked, you know, like I didn't like that. I didn't like the feeling of having no meaning and no purpose and no sense of connection to something that is peaceful and deep and riverbed, you know, of love undergirding all this. And so for me, it was actually mushrooms that brought me back to that type of faith in something good. I had kind of lost touch with that entirely. Yeah. And I think there's a reason why a lot of people who do mushrooms come out with that kind of feeling. Cause you know, they're plants growing out of God's green earth, right? Like they seem to have this ability to sort of, you know, take us to some deep places. So, yeah.
So when you first started sharing publicly a little bit of your journey, I remember talking to a friend and somebody saying something like, Audrey Assad, I heard she kind of went off the deep end and started doing shrooms.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think of it that way, but I really went to it with the same reverence that I've always gone to spirituality. You know, it came from a real desire to heal. And, you know, they are very stigmatized in our culture. But if you do any research on the modern stuff, it's like, oh, this is actually medicinal for a lot of people, for a lot of things, including addiction and, you know, healing from abuse and stuff, when done in the right setting and in the right ways. And so I really took a risk with it because I was trying to heal and nothing had worked. And I had prayed my whole life and done all this. Yeah, I tried so hard. I feel like I'm the queen of trying. I'm a queen trier. I didn't give up, but I let go.
There's a Taylor Swift song about that.
Yeah, yeah.
This is me trying.
I didn't give up, but I think I let go. And I think that's different.
Interesting. Like I don't know anything about this, so I don't know enough to be like, oh, this is crazy crackpot stuff. Or, oh, this is like cutting edge medicine that's been really well researched or whatever. So I can't endorse it or condemn it or whatever,
fair,
but it's interesting to hear your perspective. So what did this look like? Did this look like going to a doctor and then like giving you like a specific dose for your specific thing? Or was it like sitting around with some friends and it was like, hey, I heard shrooms can help with PTSD. Here you go.
Kind of in between. I did about a year of research before I did anything because I'm that way. I don't do things quickly. I read a book by a journalist named Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. And it was a 3-phase book. And I'll be really brief here, but it was a 3-phase book about the history of psychedelics in the United States. Then he does a bunch of them and chronicles his experiences. Wow. And he's a very well-respected journalist who I already loved and followed. And so it was kind of like I had a trust with him, you know, based on him and his journalistic experience. the third phase was about the research that's been being done for the last 30 years at Johns Hopkins University with psilocybin for addiction, for PTSD. So this is I knew that there was a lot of research that had been done and was showing a lot of promising things. They're in third phase clinical trials with multiple psychedelics there for these issues. And so now we live in a place where most places it's still illegal to take mushrooms or to grow them, even though they're literally just plants. But which I think is interesting. But I obtained some from a trusted source and basically went into a guided environment. It wasn't with a doctor because you can't do that in most places other than in Denver. And I think in Oakland, and there's a few cities. Denver. I know there's a few cities where it's been decriminalized, but it's very rare for that to be the case. So I can't really have access to a therapeutic setting, which is unfortunate because I feel like if we had that, then it wouldn't be, there's so much potential for abuse of things when they're not regulated and sort of done therapeutically. So anyway, I didn't have that access. So what I did was instead I went with a really seasoned and experienced friend who had been through a lot of journeys, and he sat with me as I went through it. And we did the dose that's commonly known as the hero's dose, which is 5 grams of psilocybin. And so it's the therapeutic dose essentially. And it's a very intense experience, and it lasts about 6 hours. And when I came out of it, I was a new person. I didn't have everything healed and fixed, but my OCD symptoms and PTSD symptoms went very quiet. Because I went through an experience of release and surrender in a state where you can't really control anything. And in that state, I heard like the Psalms spoken over me, specifically like, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I run from your presence? If you make your bed in hell, if I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. I had that experience in my cells, it was like, it's hard to describe, but I've written about it a little bit on my blog here and there, but it's very, it really changed the trajectory for me from nihilism to a sense of love and of goodness and of meaning and of mattering, so I'll always be thankful for that. That was huge for me. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that, I'm so glad you're feeling in a better place.
Me too.
Again, I've never researched it. Most of what I know is from what you've told me in the last few minutes. So, but it would be really interesting, as, from the Catholic perspective, we have great respect and reverence for science as a way of like pursuing truth. And so like, I think a lot of times, especially in American Christianity, we can kind of be like, no, psychology, you don't need that. Just like pray your way through.
But they can be so complementary though.
Trusting God. Yeah. And they should go together. And I've had a lot of Catholic therapists on my show for that reason, is I think they can go really well together. So that would be really interesting if this could be a way that, modern science and medicine could.
I definitely think so. I think that's what the research is showing. And to be honest, and I know I can't reveal who they are, but I know a lot of Christians who have done this because a lot of the traditional talk therapy methods have not worked for them. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you have to stop being a Christian. I know Christians who are still Christians who have done it. So it's interesting, it's something worth reading about. And why be scared of reading about something, right? It's like, what's the worst that could happen?
All right. Well, let's talk about this. Some of her other songs. What are like your favorite Celine songs?
Oh man. Okay. So, well, If You Could See Me Now, as I referenced earlier, it's a really, really amazing, like her bridge and the high note she hits. It's just top of the list for me. But I also love so many. I love That's the Way It Is, actually, which tracks, because I love Max Martin. I've never been a Heart Will Go On person. My Heart Will Go On is okay. It's not my favorite. It's like I sort of skip that one most of the time if I'm listening. I love a lot of her French music, actually. So I think she sounds even better in French because her accent is so natural, because that's what she grew up speaking. She's French Canadian. And so I love her French work. She has a record with this artist named Jean-Jacques Goldman. He's a French singer, songwriter, producer, and they did some duet albums together that I love. She has I've memorized one of her songs in French, which of course at this very moment I'm blanking on the title.
Sorry, I believe you.
But there's a few of her French ones that I really love. And then I actually really love her version of Beauty and the Beast with Peebo Bryson.
Yeah. That
It's
one
awesome.
is really good.
I mean, I love so many that's hard to choose. She's
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people first heard her was the Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
So one of my wife's favorites. It's a Carole King song. It's called "You Are the Reason."
Ooh, yeah.
And she always says that's like our song. You know,
That's cool.
Yeah, which so I had never heard it before, but I really like it.
Oh.
The other ones that I really love, I love All by Myself, just because it's like so down in the dumps.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great Star Wars meme that goes with it.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You've seen that one?
Yes.
I love that. And then what's the really cheesy one? The guy that wrote like Turn Around, Total Eclipse of the Heart.
It's all coming back to me now.
It's all coming back to me. Yeah. And he also wrote I Would Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that. Like he's written the cheesiest songs that have ever happened.
He has got a style, whoever that is.
Jim Steinman, I think is his name. Yeah.
I love To Love You More. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah.
I love that one.
My wife and I were listening to the All Coming Back to Me Now the other day, and she was singing the lyrics as like, there were nights of endless pleasure. There was more than any law. And I was like, what did she say there?
More than any laws allow.
And more than any laws allow. I was like, what sort of like kinky shit is Celine doing that it's illegal? Right? Like, what is going on?
That's pretty funny. Man, she has a song too that I heard. So speaking of songwriters that you hear in their style, there was a song she put out in 2013 called oh my gosh, I'm gonna look at it because I had her songs pulled up. It was called Loved Me Back to Life, and I heard it and I was like, that sounds just like Sia. And I looked it up, and sure enough, there it was. So she's had some cool writers in her corner over the years, you know.
That's really cool.
She's collected some good songwriters at her disposal.
So we really went in deep on that first song. So we won't have time to dive into some of these other things. That's okay. I love going deep. So it just is part of the show is sometimes the conversation goes deep. Sometimes we talk about a million different things.
Sometimes it's deep. It's cool.
But 2 questions I wanted to ask you before the end is, what would you say to, like, what advice would you have for someone who is kind of quote unquote deconstructing or having doubts, who's feeling like surrendering in a good way or a bad way, who's kind of struggling with nihilism or struggling realizing that maybe they don't believe everything they thought they believe? What would be your advice for someone in that situation?
You know, perhaps ironically, I think this is actually very Catholic advice, which is to remember that you have a body. You're not just a mind. When I was going through deconstruction, I was obsessing a little bit for a time. There was like an obsession that I had, and I've been diagnosed with OCD, spiritual OCD. You can call it scrupulosity. There's other names for it. I think that both in my faith and my deconstruction, I struggled with not being obsessive and fixated. So one thing that really helped me was to remember that I am not just a mind. I'm not just a brain. I'm not my thoughts. I am a body. I live in a body, and I am an incarnated being. And so I have to take care of that body. If I'm going through something, anything hard, whether that's losing a loved one or deconstructing your faith or getting divorced or you name it, right? Like nourishment and movement and mindfulness and water and like physically taking care of yourself will help you weather whatever is happening well. And relationships as well. I think that maintaining relationship throughout, like not siloing off, not going into your corner and reading for 10 hours and not talking to anyone about it. I felt that the echo chamber of my own mind can become very disorienting and overwhelming. And so those were the things that for me felt important, just to maintain health. Because it can get kind of, for me, out of balance where that's all I'm thinking about. That's all I'm worrying about. That's all I'm doing is figuring out what's real and what's true. And it's like, well, what's the pressure to figure that out today? You know?
Yeah, you're right. That focus on the body and the mind.
Yeah, just both, because we are both. And they need to both be in balance, you know, for health to be there. So that would be my advice primarily.
Now, you were kind of in a particular situation because as a Catholic, you were also like Catholic celebrity, you know,
right.
You were doing, Yeah, professional Catholic. So for you to make this change was not just like you're going to a different church, but now your like livelihood.
Yeah.
You know, like I know there's some people that won't sing your songs at mass anymore
or listen, which I fully
Yeah.
respect. Also, I want to be clear with anybody listening who has that perspective. Like, I respect that. I don't insist that anyone should still listen to me, and I get why they might not want to.
What would you say? What was your reaction from your Catholic friends? Do you feel like they were like, "No, we love you no matter what"? Was it like, "No, you're shunned. We're never going to talk to you again"? Like,
most of them backed away into the bushes without saying anything. Was how I would
Gotcha.
put it. Most of them, and I lost a lot of community in this whole situation. A lot, like my whole community, just kind of gone. There are a few who have really remained with me, and we still have close friendships, which I'm so grateful for. And I don't think just deconstruction is like, there are lots of things where life events happen and people drift apart. I don't, that's okay. It's painful. It was painful, and I had a lot to grieve, but generally speaking, I lost all of the community that I had, and not in any flamboyant way where people were like, "We disown you," like there were lots of people on YouTube that say stuff like that, but like the people I actually know didn't do that for the most part, but a lot of them did just sort of fade away. Like they didn't know how to be my friend, maybe, which I understand too. It's complicated. And when your whole friendship is sort of based around the things you're doing together, the rhythm of life that is your faith practice, and then what do you have in common beyond that sometimes, right? And that's okay too. But yeah, that was hard. And I think the public response was what I expected it to be, which was some people who are like, "I understand," or "I don't understand, but it's okay. I love you." And then there were a lot of people who, and still are, who are pretty mad about it.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's their experience, I'm like, okay.
What would you say for Catholics? Like what would you say to Catholics who have friends who have had your experience? Like what's the right way to go about it? If they have a friend who's deconstructing, maybe they're not going to church anymore, maybe they've expressed that they've changed their opinions on some stuff, like what's the way to do it that's not backing into the bushes slowly? What's the one that's not like,
that's a good question,
shun, go away?
The first thing that I think of is just what I think I would hope I would ask myself if I were feeling anxious about where a friend is heading or a family member. And what I would want to ask myself is, why does this bring up so much anxiety in me that they are having a different experience than I am? What is that about? And why do I feel that way? Because if I believe that God is X, Y, and Z, loving and will pursue the people that he loves, all the things that come along with a deep, pious Catholic, belief, then what am I anxious about? And am I leading with that anxiety in this relationship? And if so, why? Because honestly, regardless of why that might be or what it's about, like if it could be anything, like I said, a divorce, someone coming out as gay, someone not being Catholic anymore, someone deciding that they want to go be a clown in the circus. I don't know, like whatever the change is, why am I so anxious about it? And what does that mean for me? Because I think that a lot of us have led with, and I've done that. I have absolutely done that in relationships in the past, where I've sort of let that anxiety lead how I approach them. And that has damaged our relationship. And so that would be my main advice, would be to just a little bit of self-interrogation or a little bit of self-examination about that feeling that rises up in you when someone that you love is going through something that you don't really agree with or feel like you would land in the same place. Because I like to ask myself, do I want to be friends with this person when we're old? Then I've got to go through life with them. You can't, that's how I think about it.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. All right. Well, I think we're going to bring this in for a landing. So first of all, I just want to say, Audrey, thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to, again, discuss this with strangers on the internet and sometimes those strangers aren't always nice. So I appreciate you being willing to come on here. It's been a good conversation for me, and I hope for many of our listeners. At the end of my episodes, I always ask my guest if there's one thing that you would take away from this conversation. What's your takeaway? What are you walking away from this conversation thinking about?
I feel that there is more in life that connects us to everyone else in the world than there is that divides us. I do feel that. I think that even in a world that is full of divisions, when you really look at people across the world, across traditions and beliefs, we are more alike than we are dissimilar. I will admit that there was a phase where I did not feel that way about Catholics for a while. I was like, no, I was just feeling like I'm in such a different place. I'm so far away from that. And, I turned 40 this year. I'm so old and mature now.
Me too.
But in middle age, I'm realizing like all of that is really my invention, the invention of my mind. A lot of the divisions that I have felt in the past between people and beliefs and are things that I'm sort of I'm transposing them on the situation. Whereas from this conversation, I'm taking away today that regardless of where I may land in my beliefs right now, there's so much to discuss and share with people who believe differently than I do. And I value that. And I think that enriches my life. I would hope I would never be in a position where I'd be like, no, I'm not going to talk to that Catholic person about, like that's so prideful and so reductive and unfortunate because I always want to learn from other people too. So that's what I'm taking away is that there's always something to learn from someone and something to share with them as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think my takeaway from this is kind of what you were saying when you talked about so many of your friends kind of slowly fading into the bushes. And as you said that there's like specific people in my mind that came to mind. And it's like, well, since they made that life choice, I haven't really talked to them. And, and it's not necessarily all my fault. They could have reached out more too. But I think when people are going through big transitions, like you want to reach out more, not less. And I think I've let the craziness of life, not any malice or any disappointment in them, but just the awkwardness of it, kind of get in the way of maintaining some of those relationships. And so that's, I think the challenge for me is to try to reach out in humility and in love and compassion to some of those people that maybe I've faded into the bushes or they've faded into the bushes, and not worry about whose fault it is or who moved first, but just try to make some reconnections there. So that's what I'm taking with me. That's what I'm going to be praying for. Okay. So at the end of our episodes, we often end in prayer, which I'm happy to lead. Would you be all right with that if we close? Listeners, let's take a moment and pause and pray in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness to us. We ask that you would guide us in all that we're doing. We ask that you would guide our journeys. In the Catholic tradition, we believe that you see us, that you cover us with your providence, and that all our efforts are part of your plan. That doesn't take away our responsibility. That doesn't take away our free will, but we can have confidence in that. And so, Lord, when we have times of doubt, when we have times when we're not sure what to do, Lord, help to guide us. And I want to end here with the words of Saint, well, he's not a saint, at least not yet, but at least not officially, but Thomas Merton. And he said, "My Lord, my God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you're ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen." Audrey, I want to thank you so much for having this conversation with us. I know I'm just a stranger on the internet who reached out to you and asked you to bare your heart and soul.
Well, I felt you did that in good faith, and I appreciate your spirit about it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Audrey, if people want to know what you're up to, where should they go? Where can they listen to new music and all that?
Well, I'm on Instagram and TikTok. You can just look me up by my first and last name, Audrey Assad. I'm on Facebook and Twitter too, but I don't do a ton on any of those platforms, but I am sharing music there. And then obviously Spotify, Apple Music and such to hear the new stuff. And it may not be your thing. If you're, not going through what I'm going through, but I hope that it's at least meditative and beautiful. and something worth
Mhm.
checking out. So I would definitely love if people did do just a quick little check out of these new songs and see what they think. And if it's not their thing, it's all good, you know?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you, listeners, for going with us on this conversation, which again is a little bit different than what we normally do on this show, but I hope you learned something and you found it edifying. If something in this episode touched you, if it made you think, if there's somebody that it's making you think of, I would encourage you to send it to them. That is a little way you can spread God's love, and also it helps out the show. If you really want to help out the show, there's other ways you can do that. You can go to catholicmerch.store and buy some awesome Catholic swag that supports everything at Awaken Catholic. And also, the most direct way to support the show is by going to popculturecatechism.com and becoming a patron. You can choose from one of 6 giving levels, and you get all the talks that I give in my speaking ministry, as well as some exclusive content that comes out with our episodes. So I want to thank all our patrons, but especially Carl and Melissa Gore, Lisa Bob Tenney, Stephen Maggie Hubbard, and Tom and Emily Cambariati. Why don't you go down in the comments and tell us your favorite Celine Dion songs, or tell us your thoughts charitably, of course. Be nice to Audrey, because she was very kind in coming here and being vulnerable with us. So I trust that you'll be respectful. Audrey, thank you once again. It was so nice to talk to you. Listeners, thank you so much. God loves you. We will see you next time.